Hi golfers, Nick here for Nick Taylor Golf. It's Friday, so welcome to another lesson on golf tips. This week on Golf Tips, we're going to talk about the stack and tilt golf swing here from the side view camera. Now, we're going to go through the 9 checkpoints, and whether you're a stack and tilt player or just looking to get better at golf, then this video will really help. I'm going to kind of show you some key checkpoints, what the best players in the world do at certain positions in their swing. We're going to run through the setup, what happens in the takeaway as you take it to the top of the backswing, the movements in the downswing and into the finish to help you guys out there play better golf. In today's video, we're going to take a look at my golf swing here. This is with an 8-iron. This is from on the golf course. Now, first of all, we talked about this last week, and that's the contact. So if I zoom in here, you're going to see the contact here on the ground. Now, bear in mind, this is actually on a downslope, this shot. So you can see my club clearly hits ball first, then ground, which is the first key fundamental of the stack and tilt system. It's the first kind of key fundamental to playing good golf. So this is my swing here. It's going to play it out just so you guys can see. So it's actually on a downslope. I'm aiming just right of the pin. You can't see the pin, it's just behind my head position there, but you can see clearly good contact. The ball, I mean, almost dead straight, had a tiny bit of draw on it. So this is a really good shot of mine from on the golf course, and the reason I picked this video is really because it's a good angle. We're going to take a look at some of the key positions in the golf swing. First up here, golf, so I'm going to get my standard sort of 7-iron shot. I know using the grid system here that my path is going to be about 4 degrees into out, my attack angle is going to be about 4 degrees downwards. The ball should draw as well. So you can see on the screen there, tight little draw. So data wise, 2.6 into out, so roughly 3 degrees into out, and 4.9 degrees downwards, 95 miles an hour. So about 3 degrees into out, 5 degrees down roughly. So do that again. You can see there just to the left of the line, that one pitched about 165, something like that with a 7-iron. 3 degrees into out, 5 degrees downwards, ball contact very similar there. So you can see that those two shots there, very, very similar, almost identical trajectory, almost identical path, almost identical angle of attack. And that's what's important, right? You're not going to always get that club face perfectly square at impact or closed or open, whatever you're trying to do, but the contact should be consistent and the path and the attack angle should be consistent to play good golf. Now we're going to take you through the 9 key positions of the stack and tilt golf swing, or any good golf swing to be repeatable and play good golf. Now, I did do this video last week talking about the face-on view. These videos are independent. You can watch those both at separate times. They're linked somewhat, but also at the same time, it doesn't matter which one you watch first. So once you've watched this video, it's worth just watching the face-on view if you've not seen that. Now, take a look at, first of all, at P1. So on the screen here, I'm going to bring up my swing. So we've got P1 here. So as I set up, I've just got it on the iPad here. So I'm going to be just going through how I set up, and you can see how I've put the circle in my head position. I've got a line here on my shaft which points to my belt. The other line's just above my elbow, kind of mid to low bicep. I've got a line on the back of my hip and my knee. So these are kind of the checkpoints that I use. So if you're videoing your swing, I would suggest using these checkpoints. You don't have to use them all, but these are kind of what I would use from the side view here, just to measure certain points of the swing. Now, one thing you'd note here as I set up, you can see how my back here is slightly rounded at the top. It's not dead straight. A lot of golfers are taught to have their chin up and have their back straight. When you look at a lot of the best players, they're more relaxed at setup, and this is quite important. It gets your shoulders quite rounded, and even though the chin's tucked down, you can still move that shoulder under by tilting, and this is important. We're going to go into that into the backswing in a second, but important thing to note here is just shoulders relaxed and rounded. My arms are hanging straight down. There's probably about hand's width from my belt buckle to the club there. So my arms are hanging, back is rounded a bit more, my neck's like tucked down. You can see my feet are turned out and the club points at my belt. So this is position 1. This is the setup position. Okay, this is before the club's even moved, and there's certain things here that are quite important. You have to be quite balanced. You have to be looking down at the golf ball, and that's why I have my shoulders quite rounded. And also, when I have my shoulders rounded, that's going to help me stay connected in the swing when we get into the backswing and into the downswing. So the first thing right from the start is to try and set up correctly. Now, if you can video swing and you can use these lines, it's really going to help you analyze your swing as you progress and try and work and improve your golf. So now we're taking a look at P2. So P2 is when the shaft is parallel to the ground in the takeaway or the backswing here. So you can see that my knee flex has changed, and I'm going to be playing this video out so you can kind of see these movements. But basically my head's stable, and to keep my head stable I'm having to tilt my shoulder down. You can also see my knee flex is starting to change. You can see that red line that I had at setup there. You can see there's a gap between my knees. This is quite important. It helps you kind of tilt your hips and tilt your shoulders. But the checkpoint really at this point would be to stay stable with the head position, run the hands and club up the shaft line as you take it back. So this would be P2. So left shoulder down, hands and club moving inwards at the same rate. That's what the grid lines are for. We're not trying to move the club too much in, or the hands out and the club in, or the hands in and the club out too much here. We're just trying to swing up the plane line. So for me to take that club on plane, I feel like a slight set with my wrist, very slight, but also I feel my shoulder tilting, my shoulders turning, hips turning and tilting, and left knee flexing. Now as we get to P3, just a continuation of those movements from 2 is, checkpoint here again would be the head stable, so my shoulders are having to tilt, my knee flex changed a little bit more, and the shaft here is going through the lower part of my bicep. Okay, so it's important by this stage that I'm staying on the red line on the back of my hip, my knee flex starting to see some daylight, my hands have moved inwards, but now they're starting to raise up as my right arm starts to fold as I go back, right? This right arm doesn't stay straight. Right, that right arm folding is giving it some sort of ascent here to the hands. They're not continually moving along that red line too flat in the backswing, which I see a lot of golfers make that error, especially when they're trying to draw the ball. So I'm trying to keep my head stable, continue tilting and turning. Knee flexes continue to change. Hands are just now kind of inside that red line below my right shoulder, but the shaft is going through the kind of lower part of my bicep here. As we get to P4, we just continue turning and tilting. Now my actual right knee bend has actually, by the time I get to P4 here, it's actually starting to regain some bend, getting ready to start the turn and the sway forward in the downswing. But the checkpoints here would be to have the left arm across the line of the shoulders, head stable, this right elbow tucked in. As you can see here, knee flex is changed from setup, but it's not, my right leg's not as straight as it was at maybe P3.5. So as you see this here, I'm gaining a bit of knee bend, just getting ready to start with my lower body as we go into a transition here. But key things here would be to keep the head stable throughout the backswing. The knee flex changes a fair bit right early on in the swing, but by the time we get to the top there, you can see there's more knee flex in that right leg than I had where I was maybe halfway in the backswing. Left arm there across the line of the shoulder. So as we start into the transition here, this is quite a key move, right? My club shaft starts to shallow, and now my hands and club are a little bit more outside than they were at P3, and the shaft is now going through the kind of middle of my bicep here. Now note how my knee flex is pretty much back to where it was at setup. That right leg, you can see the knee flex, my hip stayed on this line, my head's still stable. Difference between 3 and 5, so P3 is left arm parallel, P5 is left arm parallel, but in the downswing is that my shoulders are now turning more. Right, you're more turned in the backswing with the hips and the shoulders, which means that the hands are deeper on the video picture, but I'm still kind of shallowing that club, right? I feel like as I get to the top here, that shaft kind of shallows as I turn. From 5 at left arm parallel to 6 at shaft parallel, I've got the club head just inside my hands, and just before 6, the shaft's kind of going down my right forearm here. As I'm turning and kind of shallowing the club behind me as I come down. This is quite a kind of key move. My right arm still kind of tucked in, this pressure point under my right arm. And as I come down to this point, my hips are starting to open more, and I'm actually starting to like extend up from the ground. I'm beginning to start to raise up. And I mentioned this from the video last week, but the checkpoints here would be hands and club, or the club just inside the hands at P6. Shoulders almost back to 0 at this point, so they'll be turned as I hit the ball. The shoulders are almost back to 0. Hips are opened up here. Now from this point up into impact, I'm actually going to start to raise the butt of the club as I start to push up off the ground, tilt my shoulder, move my hips forward, which we talked about in last week's video. So P6 here, the hips are more turned than they were at setup, club just inside the hands, club face is probably slightly closed if you look at it from this point of view, head's pretty stable, shoulders are almost back to 0. Now from 6 at shaft parallel to 7 at impact, you start to see how I'm kind of pushing off the ground. My right leg is pretty straight, my hips are against that line, you can see my belt's turned. So my hips are turned, my shoulders are turned at this point, but I'm also pushing my weight forward. Now my head position's slightly higher here. My handle's slightly higher than it was at setup. So the red line, the inside red line is where the shaft started at my belt. Now it's raised up as I start to extend my legs. My left shoulder starts to rise, make space for the club as it comes down. So the handle should raise, not too much, but somewhat to allow space to hit the ground as we go through. So the head is slightly higher. So that's kind of my checkpoint there. Right, the head's not perfectly in the circle at this point. This is probably the first point where the head starts to raise up as this left shoulder rises up as we go through. And like I mentioned last week, P6 is the lowest point, and then 7, that handle's starting to raise up as we push up off the ground. So moving into the finish here, you can see that my shaft here is kind of exiting just below my left shoulder. So this is kind of the key position at P8. So P8 is where the right arm's parallel to the ground. You can't see it from this view because my body's in the way there, but you can see where the shaft is coming out. So this is about P8 position. You can see how my right leg is stayed inside that line. My head's now in the circle. So as I go through here, my shoulders are probably the most tilted they ever get in the swing. As I go down here, my right shoulders here is tilted like 50 degrees. Right, in the backswing, I was tilted to the left like 35 to 40, but coming through, I'm more tilted here as I go through the ball. And this is quite important as you bring the club on plane, keep the head stable, move the hips forward. Now, key checkpoints, head's in that circle, shoulders are tilted, my hips are turned, my shoulders are turned, the shaft exits just below my left shoulder. So this is kind of a key exit position here. So now moving into the finish, you can see how the hands kind of exit on that red line. This left arm, you can see, is tucked in against my body. It's not raising up too high. And this is quite important, right? That club has to move around in a circle, right? So where my hands are in the backswing from this viewpoint, they should be in the follow through as well. So the hand position on the exit should be the same as the backswing. Okay, so the swing is moving around in a circle. So it's staying on the grid line, staying on plane. So quick checkpoint, guys. So P1 at setup here. I'm relaxed with my shoulders, my arms are hanging straight down. I'm looking down at the golf ball, chin's tucked in slightly, my feet turned out, my knees are turned out. Now as I move back here, tilting my shoulder, turning, changing my knee flex to P2 at shaft parallel, left arm parallel, keep tilting and turning. My shaft here is going through the lower part of my bicep. Now the hands start to raise even more as my right arm folds. As I get to the top, so the left arm is across my shoulders. And then the key thing, this is P4 where I'm turned the most. My right knee is a bit more flexed than it was at sort of halfway in the backswing. And as I start down here, my hips are starting to rotate and move forward. Club's starting to shallow, so now the shaft's going through the middle of my bicep at P5. P6, club just inside my hands. Shoulders are almost back to square to the target here. And then this is the point where the butt of the club raises as I start to extend upwards. Head starts to raise slightly, handle starts to raise slightly, legs starting to push off the ground. Then as I come through into the exit position, as I keep turning, my right shoulder tilts. The shaft exits just below my left shoulder, and then as I complete the swing, I have a slight shoulder tilt in the finish, hands exit below my left shoulder, and then you can see there throughout the swing there, my head's pretty stable from this position. Doesn't really move too much, it raises slightly at impact, and it doesn't move again really until the finish position right at the end of the swing. So you've got to keep that head stable, you have to tilt, so important in the golf swing, right? You've got to tilt, shoulder down, right shoulder down as you go through, move the hips forward. But the main checkpoints here, guys, is really the shaft plane, the key checkpoints there with those lines. So if you're videoing your swing, right, use these lines, these are important, right? These have got key checkpoints, right? I've detailed these pretty much as best I can to kind of highlight these key checkpoints that you're looking for in a good golf swing, or the stack and tilt golf swing in this case. So thanks for watching, golfers. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Any questions on that, post in the box below. And I'll see you again next week for another video.